everyone, can you hear me okay? My name is Jamil Misbauddin. I'm the Director of Secondary Education here, and before I pass it over to our visitors from Keene, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to give a brief overview. A lot of times when we talk about addressing bias, we get the question from families about, how is this taught in school? What is kind of the continuum and the different ways that it looks? And so the answer is it's taught extensively, and I'm just going to give it, like I said, a brief overview now. But at the end, I'll have a QR code where you'll have this slide and the links to it, and also my email address. I'm happy to follow up with more detail. But just to kind of start, so as a public school in New Jersey, we take our cues from the NJDOE, and they set out directives and mandates that we follow and we put into practice throughout our school district. And so on this first slide here is just kind of a statement from the DOE about how they set their student learning standards, and I won't read it to you word for word, but one of the things you'll see it say is highlighting the contributions and experience of individuals with diverse abilities, identities, and perspectives. And then in conjunction with that, as a school district, we have our mission and vision and values, and I'll share the statement, and it's linked more here, but about how we model equity and inclusion. So we're following through on our vision and also meeting the mandates of the state. And what you'll see on this next slide is specific legislature from the state really that's been passed over the last several decades about how this instruction should look in New Jersey public schools. So every school in the state is expected to follow these. And so they all, I won't go word for word again, but they all kind of start off with the language, include instruction on ... And so I'll take you through them all. And again, when you get this presentation later, these are all links to the legislature. So these are to the state, the full bill that was passed, and there is the year that it was passed. So the first one is the Amistad Law, commonly referred to, and again, including instruction on slavery in America, as well as the accomplishments and contributions of African Americans to American society. So if you read the full legislature, it talks about how this needs to be included at the elementary, middle, and high school levels, what specifically needs to be addressed, and how it should look. And then I'll take you through the rest. We have Asian American Pacific Islander. That was more recently a part of the legislature. Again, this is instruction on the history of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Diversity and inclusion one. This is more kind of just a broad mandate that we've been following since 2021. The Holocaust is the oldest one. The Holocaust mandate talks about including instruction on the Holocaust and genocide to understand that genocide is a consequence of prejudice, and also emphasizing the personal responsibility we all have to fight racism and hatred. So this has been something that's been expected in schools since 1994, and so we've been doing this. And I'll clarify, as a K-12 school district, this looks very different at the elementary school than it does at the high school, and I'll give some examples in the following slides. Specifically for the Holocaust, there is some age appropriateness, obviously. So at the elementary level, you'll see really it's less about like definitions and things that specifically happened in the Holocaust, and more about understanding the Jewish people and some of the history there. And then finally, we have LGBTQ and people with disabilities, passed in 2018, and again, presenting the contributions and perspectives from that group. And so what you'll see on the next few slides are just some examples. Again, this is taught extensively throughout the whole time that children are in our school district. I don't want to take you through, okay, in first grade we do this, and in third grade, and that would take us throughout the night. But I just want to show you kind of a couple quick examples, and then also, again, you'll see links. So these links on the side will take you to our district website, where we provide a one-page overview of how this looks, again, K through 12. So you'll see also, too, a stark difference in how it looks in the elementary versus secondary levels. Like I said, we like to be age appropriate and fact-based, right? And that's kind of our main goals when we're giving this information to our students. And so for the Amistad curriculum, if you remember earlier, that was about the contributions of African Americans and slavery. And so an example might be at our elementary school, our students will read a biography of Martin Luther King Jr., kind of written about more about his childhood, something that they can identify with. At the secondary level, it'll be a little bit more specific about reading the Emancipation Proclamation and the Gettysburg Address, and how those ideas led to the ideas of equality for all, right? And so deeper dives at the secondary level. For our Asian American Pacific Islander mandate, one of the things we do, and again, these are just small, light touches. If you go through these links, you'll get a larger, more in-depth overview. Again, a book here. This one's about a Hawaiian swim club team that ends up going on to compete in the Olympics, right? So it's kind of talking about the contributions of Pacific Islanders. In 8th grade, students are reading about Chinese Cinderella, which is a book that from a Chinese American author describing her experiences growing up in China. So getting that perspective of what was it like to grow up with that experience, right? Bringing in the diverse perspectives. On the next slide here, just a quick again about the Holocaust. Again, in elementary school, we're not giving graphic details of the Holocaust. That would not be age appropriate. But we are sharing with students maybe some reading. An example here is Bartali's Bicycle. It's a story about a cyclist from Italy that helped deliver fake identity papers to families that were hiding, right? And so kind of sharing about like a hero in this time. And then really, and again, there are many other times from middle school on up, but I'm just giving this one example in the 11th grade, talking about the various perspective of the Holocaust, how it led to the formation of the United Nations. And then finally, our LGBTQ and disabilities, an example of a book students read, and then a specific 7th grade example of when they learn about the judicial branch. Our students learn about the Supreme Court, different decisions about same-sex marriage, Americans with Disabilities Act. Those are the ways that we meet these mandates. And so, again, if you click those links in green, you'll get a full overview with more examples throughout the elementary and secondary levels of how we do this. And to be honest, been doing this for quite some time. That doesn't mean that we have perfected it. You know, we're always looking to kind of add to it. Obviously, there are times where we need to more specifically address things, and we make sure to do that. And so we're constantly looking to kind of grow there, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But also, too, as educators, we also want to develop our skill set, right? You know, we all went to college to become teachers, and we might have had some education on diverse perspective, but it wasn't I was a math education major. I maybe got a little bit of that information, but most of my classes were about math and how to teach math. And so we know that we can grow as educators as well. And so one of the major inflection points was the 23-24 school year, where we set a goal to engage in PD around responsive practices and better engage with the different students in our building. And so throughout that year, all of our half-day PDs, our teachers got training on understanding different perspectives, different cultures, and also responding to microaggressions, which can be biased and can be, a smaller subset of bias, but we wanted to better handle these kinds of conversations in the classroom. And so throughout that year and since, we've been training ourselves and our new teachers as they enter the school district on interrupting a biased comment. So if you're in the classroom, a student says something that is biased, how do you handle that? Obviously, we have a code of conduct, and there are maybe some repercussions outside of the classroom, but what should a teacher be saying in that moment to stop that comment, address it, maybe repair the hurt that it caused? And so that's been an ongoing thing that we've continued to be a part of our new teacher training. Actually, here's just a picture. A few of our teachers were actually selected to present at Caldwell University on this education, and it's something we're committed to. Every new teacher group that comes in the summer, this is part of their training. And so, yes, it's part of this work is what we teach in the classroom, but it's also how we learn and grow as educators ourselves. And as I said, this is ongoing. We're constantly looking to revise our curricula. I welcome any contributions from parents. Sometimes parents will say, hey, this is a great book that you might want to consider bringing in, and then we'll review it and consider, maybe that's a good additional perspective to add to our classroom libraries. And also just events like this, learning overviews. And so we want to make sure that we know that this work is never done, but we also want to make sure that we're bringing parents in as partners. And so I thank you for giving me just a few minutes now just to kind of give you that overview. Like I said, on this slide, if you capture that QR code, and we'll share the slides out too, so you have them. But that'll take you to this presentation. It'll take you to all the links. And at the end, there is my email address. I'm happy to answer questions or take suggestions from you. So thank you. I'm not going to take questions or comments now because I don't want to take time from our friends from Kane, but please reach out, and I'd be happy to connect with you further. But I'm going to pass off now to Sarah and Adara from Kane to speak more about addressing bias. So thank you.
Okay. Can we do it as present?
Maybe.
It's maybe. We'll see that. Excellent. So again, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you for the introduction. There is one thing you forgot that I think it's important that the district and parents are aware of, is that the district hosted our graduate courses, which were tuition waived for all educators, 2 years ago now, on teaching the Holocaust and prejudice reduction. So from our standpoint, as people who work with educators every day, and we hear the good, but more often I think all of us hear the bad, it's really nice to be invited into spaces and to be able to get to work with educators who are being proactive. We're not here tonight to shame anyone, to blame anyone. That's not how we do anything, but rather to share some strategies with you to make sure that when incidents do happen, because they will, and they will happen anywhere and everywhere, regardless of how strong a curriculum model is, how well teachers are trained, and how kind students are, because we're human beings and we make mistakes. So, a little bit about who we are. My name is Adara Goldberg. I am the executive director of, just wait for it, the Holocaust Resource Center, the Council on Global Education and Citizenship, and the Human Rights Institute at Kane University. And I come to this work as somebody with a background first in social work, and then I have a doctorate in Holocaust history. But I've been working in the education sphere, particularly in higher ed, for the last 20 years. And I'd like to introduce you to my colleague.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Quakendahl. I'm the Director of Education of all of those places that Adara just mentioned, and I'm really excited to be here tonight, not only with district admin and staff, but with parents, because Adara and I are parents ourselves, and we know what it takes to come out on an evening, to be away from your families after a long day, and to be learners. You're going to be students, just like your students are. We're going to include you in the conversation and ask for your opinions and your reflections. The virtual attendees, sorry you can't join us for that part, but this is an engaging experience because we do want you to feel like you are part of the conversation. We're not just here to stand up in front of you for an hour or so and, give ideas and thoughts, but rather hear from you as well. What are your perspectives? How have you handled things in the past? And what would you like to see? And so that's really our goal as we continue, is just to make you immersive in this conversation. Will you do this part?
Sure. Okay. So the very, very long name of what we do. Our goal in everything that we do when we work with school districts, with educators, with students, with parents, is first to create safer, more inclusive school spaces and climates. So what that means is we deliver brave space training. Any thoughts on why we do not call it safe space?
Anyone hear that before? Safe space? That's kind of like a buzz term, right, in the last few years. And so Adara and I reflected on that almost immediately, because while we can say somewhere is a safe space and we can do trainings, we can have seminars like this where we feel safe in a space, I cannot guarantee safety. Adara is unable to guarantee safety. I can control what I say, even though I may make a mistake. Adara can control what she says, you all can control what you say, but at the end of the day, I can't control what other people do in a space, no matter what. So I can't guarantee that it's safe. So I don't want to put something that says this is a safe space, because I don't want to falsely represent it. What I can do, though, is guarantee that it's a brave space, where you and I feel empowered together to have tough conversations, to address challenging topics, to make those mistakes that we're all going to do. I stumble all the time, but I get back up, but I clarify, but I redirect, but I listen and learn. And that's what makes the space brave, to have an opportunity to be yourself, to be heard, and be vulnerable, right? These are not easy things to talk about. We're gonna be talking about stereotypes and bias. I'm going to challenge our beliefs a little bit here. And that's okay, because I am coming into this with a brave space mentality, that we can do this together. And so that's why we like to differentiate between a safe space and a brave space.
Thank you. So our goal, we want to create braver, more inclusive spaces for all learners at all ages and all stages. And we help school districts like Caldwell-West Caldwell address these biases, address challenges you might be facing, but doing it all in alignment with New Jersey state mandates, which is really, really important that we remember why we're here and why we do this work in the first place. Our work really empowers students to be critical thinkers. We work with educators to help them boost their confidence in tackling complex topics because they are complex. And everybody is coming into this work from a very different space, personally, professionally, and helping teachers and family members understand all of the different perspectives, opinions, and experiences in the room can make things so much more successful for your kids and have them come home at the end of the day feeling good about being in the classroom. And then from a more public standpoint, we run programs probably every other week. So we work with a variety of organizations on and off campus to run commemorative programs, teacher professional development, pretty much every other week. We are 2 full-time people, and we bring in students to campus for leadership opportunities. So that's something really important to us, that they, again, feel good, they feel strong when they leave a space, and they also feel empowered to create change.
All right. So why this presentation? I think it's pretty understandable why you're here, but you can tell me if you have a different reflection. You're here to learn about bias. You're here to learn about what happens when there's an act of bias, whether in the broader community or in the school community, and what role parents have in addressing that bias. And so the core understanding that we want you to take away is that bias can be unlearned. Prejudice, racism, they all have the ability to be combated at the everyday level. It's going to take time, guidance, modeling, right? Showing your student, your child, how to be an agent of change, intervention, but it's entirely possible. And so later on in the presentation, when we talk about acts of bias, we're going to come to it from the parent perspective in 3 ways. What to do when your child is the one that perpetrated the bias, what to do when your child feels victimized by the bias, and what to do when your child wants to be a change maker, because bias doesn't just impact those that perpetrated it and those that feel harmed by it, it impacts everyone in our community. So what do we do then when our child wants to make a difference? So those are the 3 perspectives that we're going to talk about later on. Okay, and because we're here to learn and to educate one another and be lifelong learners, we didn't want to just assume that every parent in the room knows what bias is or the different forms of bias or what stereotypes are. So this is just a generalized definition of a stereotype. It's a standardized mental picture that's held in common by members of a group that represents an oversimplified opinion, a prejudiced attitude, or an uncritical judgment. Discussions on stereotypes include, but are not limited to, racial, gender, cultural, and geographical biases. So I'm not going to ask anyone in this room to verbally share a stereotype, but just, close your eyes for a second and think of something that we hear constantly, right? I'm sure we could all do it very easily, but why? Why is it so easy for us to do that? What do you think, parents? Why is it so easy for us to come up with a stereotype? Yes. Yes, they're always around us. They're stereotypes for a reason and because people constantly say them. Okay, so close your eyes again. How do we combat stereotypes? Okay. Was it as easy to think of how you were going to combat them versus trying to think of one? No, right? And that's what's happening in our society. That's what's happening all around us. It is very easy for us to instantly come up with a stereotype based on any of these categories or maybe one that we didn't talk about. It's not as easy to think of ways to address them, to combat them. Why? If stereotypes are always around us in our society, in our news, in our media, in our social life, we hear them constantly, we hear them amongst colleagues, we hear them amongst friends, we grew up with them. There are even stereotypes that are thousands of years old. So if stereotypes can exist between time, place, and space, how come addressing them doesn't have that same influence? Oh man, parents, you were like, I didn't come here to talk. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes. They've become part of the fabric of our society. They've almost become invisible. And then so the question we have to ask ourselves, and what we're hopeful that our students are asking themselves, is how come combating them? How come standing up to them, right? That stop, say something. How come that's not something that took over as these stereotypes became more prevalent? And it's because it's not always easy to recognize them. So stereotypes can be emotionally damaging. We all know that. But let's think of intent versus impact. If we intend to do something, maybe someone intends to make a joke because they think it's going to be funny, or they intend to do something lighthearted, but the impact is that it's caused harm that needs to be addressed and repaired. So let's take an example. Anyone have high school student? Okay, great. Anyone remember when they were in high school? You're a senior in high school, yes? You get a yearbook, right? What's in that yearbook? Besides photos of yourself, your class portrait. What's in that yearbook? I'm thinking of a really funny word that starts with an S. Superlatives, yes. What's a superlative? Right, most likely to XYZ. But let's take a look at this definition of stereotype. How does someone earn a superlative? Do they nominate themselves? Probably not, right? They are put in a standardized mental picture held in common by members of the group, being their classmates, their peers. They are being voted on by their peers, placed into a category, and then that category is announced. They take photos, right? It's meant to be lighthearted, a fun way for seniors to reflect and memorize. But how could that actually possibly cause damage? What are some categories? So most likely to what? Yes, students might not actually see themselves that way. And maybe there are students, but I personally have not met a student that's going to turn down an opportunity to be in the yearbook, right? So let's think of some examples. Most likely to succeed. Whose definition of success is that student being placed to? Yours, mine, theirs, their classmates? It's an ambiguous question, right? It's placing someone into a category that they may not agree with or feel that they can live up to. And then days, weeks, years, if they haven't, quote unquote, fulfilled that success, that may cause harm to them, right? They may feel that they're letting people down because they were put into that category. What about best dressed? How could that be a stereotype? What about kids that can't afford modern clothes, luxury clothes, right? In-style clothing. Are they going to be picked for that category? No, so they didn't even earn the superlative, and yet it's causing harm to them because they know that they weren't picked for that because of their social and economic situation. So something that is innocent, right, that we think is supposed to be fun and lighthearted, is part of this. And so that's what I'm trying to say. It's not to say to ban superlatives and take them out of the yearbook. It's to get us thinking, right? How do the things that we accept as normal, right? We talked about things being part of our society. How do we take what's accepted as normal and just think about it a little bit differently? Maybe we change the superlatives that students can win, right? Still fun, still exciting, still get to be in the yearbook, but might have a little less of this unintended consequence. Okay. Can you take this for a second?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So something that we hear all the time, and this is probably the number one thing that we get called about, is that students, especially middle school students, it seems to be the really hot topic, tell jokes. Jokes that aren't very funny. And oftentimes, what we hear is someone calling, we'll get a call from a teacher or an administrator saying, so we had a group of boys, and I'm like, they're in 7th grade. I'm like, I just know where this is going. And they said, so they were joking on the playground, and one of them called somebody by, a racial slur. And other kids laughed, and no one knew what to do. And everyone stood there really awkwardly. And when the student gets, I say called out, and I wouldn't have called them out that way, but when the student gets approached by a teacher, by someone at the school, the response is usually something like this. Don't take it so personally. I didn't mean it that way. You're just overreacting. Don't be so sensitive. That's my favorite one, as someone that's always been called sensitive. And only as an adult do I realize, they weren't saying that as a nice thing. Or I was only joking. And listen, I have a kid who currently thinks that saying 6'7" is really, really funny as a joke. I still don't know what it means. But it goes to show that, my sense of humor as an adult is different than a kid's. And that's fun. Kids are funny, and random things come out of their mouth. The issue becomes when they really do believe that what they're saying is just a joke and not harmful. So I approach everything from the lens of they just don't know, and give benefit of the doubt to people that most kids aren't trying to hurt each other's feelings, be rude, but they're hearing these messages every single place they go. They're online. It doesn't matter how well parents monitor this. They are still hearing and seeing things in a manner that they themselves may not be comfortable with, but they think it's funny, and they don't know what to do with that. So why are we telling you this? So we're going to show you. We're going to try to show you. We're going to try.
We never make promises with the video.
No. A short video to hear from students themselves about comments that they've heard from peers.
Oh, you're so pretty from a black girl. Oh, she has a June nose. Oh, your hair would look so good if it was straight. Shoes are so cheap. Why are they so cheap? Do you speak good English? How are you an Iraqi Jew? I think the person saying microaggression kind of doesn't really think about it. This person who said it was their friend, like, I was astonished they would, say something like that. You don't want to make a big deal about it, but then it's also like, you just said something that offended me, so I feel like I should speak up. Because they're micro, because they're very subtle, they're small, you feel like you don't have a reason to be upset. You're overreacting, and people even can make you feel that way when you bring it up. They're like, oh, you can't take a joke. You're making too big of a deal of this. Why are you overreacting? Don't take it so seriously. It was just a joke. Chill out. So you're like, oh no, I actually love black people. I love people of color. Like, they try to just minimize the situation. If someone feels hurt by a microaggression, it shouldn't just be pushed aside. It definitely has negative impacts and, leads to people disliking who they actually are. Those kinds of subtle, offensive comments can build up over time, and they can have, a deep psychological effect, and, they can make you feel bad, and they can make you doubt yourself. We try to just use jokes to, make things less awkward or, ease social experiences, but it is important because you need to, be aware of what you're saying and, who you're speaking to. Think of what you say and how it can affect the person you're saying to.
The video worked. That's the highlight of the night for me. Okay. So the reason we showed you this is because these are the messages that your kids are hearing every day at school. No matter what school they're at, no matter who their friends are. I think about growing up and being told I hung out with the right group of kids. And I asked my parents as an adult what they meant by that. They said, oh, well, you were growing up with nice kids. I'm like, so as opposed to what? As opposed to the kids who came from, other areas. And I had this conversation with them recently. They are people who are very open-minded, they're very progressive, and when I brought up to them, so what you were really saying is, I was friends with the kids who were in a particular bracket, who came from similar homes to me, who had similar ambitions to me, and that somehow made them better. I'm like, who was worse? And they just stopped, and they're like, we've never actually stopped to think about this. They're like, we just took for granted the things that we had for you. And this was their bias. They were nice to everybody. I can't imagine them having mistreated anyone that came into our home for any reason. But they were carrying this subconscious bias about who the different people were, based in this case on geography, which was tied right into socioeconomics. And as someone that grew up in a space that was very diverse, I'm from Toronto. It's one of the most diverse cities, in the world. And so I grew up hearing so many different languages, meeting people from so many different cultures, and yet there were still very, very clear divisions, even within that. And so it's been as an adult raising kids of my own where I have to stop and think about this, that what messages are they hearing from me? What messages are they hearing at school and from their peers? Because everybody's prejudiced and everybody has bias. So rather than trying to, convince everyone that we don't have it, it's how do we manage it in a way that keeps our kids as safe as possible and helps them figure out how they can stand up and challenge these biases that, they feel and they're going to experience no matter how much we want to protect them.
Thank you. Okay, so some of us may be familiar with the words, bias, unconscious, subconscious bias, bias that we don't even realize that we have. We do it without thinking. And so when we look at the definition, bias is prejudice in favor or against a group, being compared to someone, and it's usually considered to be unfair. And that's very similar to our definition of stereotypes, right? So do you mind? Okay. So when we think of bias, how often though do we think of the different forms of bias? There are several different forms. In fact, we didn't list them all today for you. We just wanted to give you a few examples of bias that our students may be hearing on a daily basis, bias that we experience. All of the same ways that we talked about experiencing hearing stereotypes, that exists also for bias. But how often do we put a name to it? So let's look at the first one, affinity bias. Liking classmates who share your interest, your background, or your appearance. Okay, our next one is beauty bias. Anyone hear of beauty bias before? Okay, a couple of us. Favoring students perceived as more attractive or popular. Confirmation bias, noticing and remembering information that confirms existing beliefs. Gender bias and stereotyping, so examples are assuming boys are better at science or math, or that girls are better at reading and arts, or that quote-unquote boys will be boys for misbehaving, leading to different expectations and opportunities. And the last example we have is racial or ethnic bias, making assumptions about a student's abilities or background based on their race or ethnicity, or invalidating their lived experiences. And so let's do some real-world examples. Okay. A teacher calls on boys more often in class and encourages their vocal participation. But the teacher overlooks girls who have their hand raises, making them feel less significant in the discussion. What kind of bias is this example showing, and how might it be impacting the students in the class? Told you were going to be learners tonight. Which bias do we have here? Yeah, go back. Yep, exactly. Gender bias, okay. Could it be a different form of bias? Could be confirmation bias, okay. Affinity bias, yes, okay. So let's go to back. So you're all correct. Gender bias, confirmation bias, affinity bias. For this example, I would say that the most quote-unquote correct answer is actually affinity bias. However, there is nuances. There's, interjecting and weaving between the definitions because they overlap. Could be gender, right, because we're talking specifically about boys or girls. Confirmation, right, because there may have been an instance in that teacher's lived experience where boys in a certain grade were better at certain subjects, and so that's carried them through their teaching unconsciously, right? I bet the teacher's not knowingly doing this, so it's an unconscious bias, but it's affinity bias, okay? So let's look at the next one. There's an in-group. Sarah, coincidentally, David and Mike, they all grew up in that same small town, and so they have mutual friends there. They bond over the memories and local slang and terminologies. But Emily and Ben are new to the school, and they don't know anyone from the town. What kind of bias is this, and why do you think so? So can we go back to thank you. Affinity bias, okay. Beauty bias, okay, interesting. What else? Any other ones?
I have one.
Yeah.
It's not listed here, but I often think about geographic bias, which is really not about specifically where you live, but what the place that you live suggests about you. And this is something that especially in New Jersey, we hear a lot. So, what do people think this one comes down to? Oh, see, I would go with geographic bias, because this really, in many cases, especially thinking about where we come from, all of the attributes we attribute to a place. So I think about Canada, because again, you got to forgive me, but that's my frame of reference, is where I grew up. And when I'm traveling the world or I meet people in different places and they ask where I'm from, I say Toronto. And they're like, but are you really from there? Like, or are you from the suburbs? I'm like, no, I'm from Toronto. And I'm like, why does this matter so much to me? Like, besides just, that being an ego thing, that I come from the 416, when it was still the 416, and that's my parents' phone number. It's because of all of the ideas I had growing up about the people who lived in other places, who used to like to say they were from there. And I think as an adult, I'm like, oh, that was just a better reference point for the rest of the world. But I carried with it a lot about what it meant where they came from, what they had, how similar or dissimilar they were to me. And I was often the kid who was part of that out of group because I didn't come, from the same, socioeconomic background as many of the kids who moved in the same circles as me. And so I've perpetually been that out group and still feel like that today as an adult.
So these examples aren't meant to trick us, right? They're not meant to, be hard, right? This is meant to be a learning opportunity, but I wanted to show you that we're adults, right? We have lived experiences, we understand these terms, and yet it's not easy for us to pick just one thing that these examples fall to. There's differentiation, there's overlap between the categories. And so if our students, our children are experiencing this every day, how hard must that be for them, right? To kind of understand and come to terms with what they're experiencing. Do they know that they are experiencing bias? How do we help them to recognize this? And if they do recognize it, what do we do then to support them through that? And so we're not going to play this video, but we want to show you the pyramid of hate. Has anyone seen this before? Okay, a couple of us, great. So it's not great that this exists, but it's great that you've seen it because it truly demonstrates the way that words matter. So on the bottom of the period, we have biased attitudes, right? Those things that we've been talking about this evening, unconscious bias, the different forms of bias, stereotypes, prejudice. A pyramid has to start somewhere, and it starts with biased attitudes. But then what happens when those go unchecked, right? When those aren't discussed or stopped or combated? We get to the next stage, and that's acts of bias and discrimination. It could be a physical act, right? Something that we see, something that is harmed. But what other acts of bias exist? What do you think, Adara? What other acts of bias exist?
Excluding people at school, not making space for someone, sort of at the metaphorical table. Instances where we see graffiti in places, because we see it again everywhere. It's not violent. And so often we sort of brush it off as, well, again, boys will be boys, they're just being kids, they don't know better. And so again, those are acts that happen every single day.
And then we have the third is systemic violence, the fourth is bias-motivated violence, and the top of the pyramid is genocide. And so while it may seem like a long way to go from biased attitudes to genocide, it's not that easy to differentiate between how viewing people as other, treating them differently, and not being challenged in treating them differently can lead to genocide. And we see it in all examples of genocide where you can notice the stages. It's called the 10 stages of genocide. We won't go over them tonight. That's another presentation. But it truly does start at the bottom, makes its way to the top. And while there are some voices along the way that have challenged and caused alarm, it's really because it has become accepted that genocide is able to take place. So let's bring it back together. Bias and prejudice feed on our beliefs and attitudes that unfairly create favor for or against an individual or a group of people. So how do we help our students navigate this? Okay, you want to take the first one?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. So what can I do when my child is the perpetrator of a bias incident? To be clear, when we say perpetrator, I was trying to think of a better word for this. All day. This is all we think about because, again, perpetrator sounds like someone who's committed a crime. but I want you to forgive us and think about it as more just the person, the student, the teacher, because let's be clear, teachers can do this just as much as a student can, that has done something that has caused harm to another. So the first thing to do, as a parent, is to stop and pause. I know my gut reaction when my kid does something wrong is to jump right into it, to immediately tell them to stop, that what they're doing is wrong, it's harmful, how can you say this? And to pause, because I know that I am reacting because I'm angry. Maybe I'm embarrassed that my child was the one that said something, because they do this. And to do what I tell my kid to do, which is literally take a breath and take a step back. And maybe that means walking away for a few minutes. So take a pause, because you want to be your best version if you're asking them to be their best version. Avoid punishment, and that's something that people sort of run to us and say, so do you mean there's no consequences? I'm like, there's a difference between consequence and punishment. The minute everything becomes about punishment, all that you've taught a kid is that I did something wrong, I'm gonna get my phone taken away, and now I'm just gonna be more angry than I was before. And remember that the child is not their behavior. People screw up. We all screw up. How do we respond to that? How do we remind our kid, we love you. This was not okay, but we love you. And we know that you are better than this, and this does not define you, and we don't ever want an incident to define a person. So, what can I do practically? He just said, I need a few minutes. I do this all the time. Can we talk in 15? Let your kid know that you are going to be calm speaking with them, and you expect the same from them. The higher emotions run, the more poorly that discussion is going to go. And I feel ridiculous in a way saying this to parents, but again, it's our gut reaction is to go at the problem and perhaps make it even bigger and worse than it could have been. I want to be present when I'm having a conversation, and I want to do it without me being the worked up one. Ask your child to help them understand what was going on in the situation. Is there something bothering you? And I think this really leads into the trauma-informed approach, that it's really, really easy to just blame a kid because they called someone a name they shouldn't, or they put graffiti on the wall, as opposed to finding out what happened. And I think hearing from them first, even if all evidence points towards the fact that someone did something really stupid and really harmful, you're still listening to your child. You're still listening to your student and letting them know, again, you are there for them no matter what happened. The goal is not to punish, the goal is to repair.
And so when we talked in the beginning of the presentation about the brave space, I want to clarify that the brave space is wherever you are as the parent, whether you've been called into an administrator's office to have this conversation, whether the conversation waits till you're at home or another space, you are the brave space for the child. You are there to have the open dialogue. You're gonna make mistakes. I make mistakes every day as a parent, right? Even if you take that 15-minute pause, you might say something you don't mean or say something out of character for you, because this is an out-of-character situation. It's okay because you've established that brave space for you and your child. Some things to avoid, and again, it goes in line with those microaggressions that we were talking about. Try not to justify the child's actions, right? Don't say it was just a joke, or they didn't mean it that way, or everyone's too sensitive, or sometimes kids do that. It's easy for us not only to be angry at our child for making those decisions, but also for us to try to repair for our child, right? Because it's in our nature to want to defend them, to make it go away for them, make it easier for them, even if they've done something wrong. So again, even that 15 minutes, even if it's not for the child, it's for you. It's so that we don't say these things, because that is what continues the harm, making these very easy mistakes, which we all have the natural inclination to say. Okay. So focus on the accountability. Again, staying regulated helps your child learn to regulate themselves. Be clear and conscious to name the behavior. We don't have to be afraid of the behavior. We can openly say, this is what you did. I want to hear from you as to why and why it caused harm. Acknowledge that you're going to set expectations. So when we say don't approach with consequence, if you get into the office or your home and say, you're in so much trouble, how could you do this? That child has a wall up, right? Doesn't matter what's going on, they have a wall up. Regulate for them that there is going to be a consequence for their action, but it's about repair. And repair and reconciliation can look different. Sometimes that's an apology, it's a conversation, it could be a mentor and guided conversation with those that they've harmed, and it's about changed behavior. If a child is willing to work on what led up to the situation and change it going forward, that is how we institute repair. Okay. So all of the things that we just talked about, and we just talked about this earlier. There's empathy, right? Empathy is also learned. Just as bias is learned and bias can be unlearned, empathy is taught, right? Yes, we are born with it, but it also needs encouragement. It needs nurturing. It needs lessons so that children can learn to tap into that empathy. And so we can say things like, I understand you wanted to make a joke. Acknowledge what they may have said. Acknowledge why they did something, but tell them how it caused harm. Don't assume that they know why it caused harm. The consequence is not the punishment, it's the retribution. And know that it's not really something that you would want to do or have done to you. Again, modeling, making sure that it matches the lived experiences, not only for those that have been harmed, but for them going forward. Okay, and what to do if your child has been the victim of bias or prejudice. Again, we want to regulate and center. And victim, this is also the word that we struggled with today because we are scholars of genocide, and so those are natural terminology. But it doesn't mean that victims have no agency, right? Have no say. It just means that they have experienced the harm of someone's actions. And so if your child has experienced harm because of a bias or prejudice act, start with acknowledging your child has trusted you to be that brave space, and determine if your child is safe. Are they physically safe? Are they emotionally safe? And I also added digitally. Are they digitally safe? Are they safe on their devices? Is the device a safe space? And if it's not, it's okay as the parent to take that away. Even though they are the one that is receiving the harm, removing the digital space so that they are safe is priority. And so how do we support our child? A child will feel a wide range of emotions. So talk to them about their feelings. They're not just going to feel sad. They're going to feel angry, confused, frustrated. They may be scared. They may not want to go back to a certain space. Reinforce for them that it was not their fault and that coming forward is a brave thing to do. Ask them what they need from you. How can you be most effective? Yes, we are the parent. Yes, we're supposed to make the decisions at the end of the day because we do know best, but our child also knows best for them too in that present moment. So ask them what they need from you. How can you be best support? And so you can say things like, do you want me to problem solve or do you want me to just listen? And what would make you feel safer? Okay. We were invited by the school to be here, and so we would be remiss to say that when your child experiences or commits an act of prejudice or bias, that you should partner with the school. And we genuinely believe this because the school is here to be an important, safe learning environment for your students. Teachers, staff, administrators are trained to do so, especially as we learned before this presentation, and so tap into that training. Use them as support. So the first step is to report. Report the incident immediately to teachers, administrators, staff, anyone with direct means to assist, or even the child study team if this is applicable. And then share. Were there patterns of behaviors? Has your child talked about this before? How is this impacting them? No, it's not going to be resolved overnight. My mother was so guilty of this. I should apologize to that past school principal because she wanted something that happened to me addressed immediately. And that's just not realistic. Again, it goes back to taking that 15 minutes trying to regulate yourself. I bet if she had taken a breath, it wouldn't have happened like that, but it's because, we want what's best for our kids and we want them to go to school that very next day. feeling good, and sometimes that doesn't happen because things take time. There has to be an investigation, conversation, dialogue. And so if we assist in that matter, even though it may not happen at the speed that we hope, we're going to get a better end result if things aren't rushed. Communicate. Keep it calm, specific, and solution-oriented. Not always easy, but something that we should strive for. And then follow up. It's okay to send an email or leave a voice message that you're just looking for more information. It's okay to say that you appreciate the school, right? Acknowledge that there's work being done on both sides in order to come up with the best solution for everyone involved. Okay.
So more likely than not, the majority of students are going to fall into this category. So we refer to them as a bystander, but you can also think of it as a witness or a neutral party. Now, when we say that, who am I referring to? When I say a bystander or a neutral party? What would be an example of that? Yeah. Yeah. So the majority of the time, most kids fall into this category. I think most people are good. Like, I genuinely believe most kids are good. They mean well, they're trying their best. And sometimes, a student won't understand, why was everyone so upset? I made a joke about this group of people, but nobody in that group belongs to that population. So therefore, it wasn't damaging. And what I can tell you, we watch, as I'm sure all of the teachers do, all administrators, many, many, many videos each year, training videos, that talk about who is harmed. And the fact of the matter is, if you are witnessing something, it does not matter how you identify. It is still damaging to be hearing things that are harmful and hurtful from your peers. So a few things about this. When your child's witnessing this, because they do every day, guaranteed, they don't know how to react. They don't know what's appropriate, and they don't realize that one person's actions or comments can actually do a lot of damage. The flip side of that is when students hear comments, they have discussions with their peers that are really positive and uplifting, that sort of does the reverse. And more of the time than not, that's what they're doing. Again, most kids are kind to each other and do not want to ever cause harm. But if my kid is in that situation, and I had this happen recently with another mom that I was with. So my children, no surprise, are very, very, very short. But we're talking extremely short, where they look much younger than they are. And my daughter went to kindergarten, and she came home really upset. And it took a while. We couldn't figure out why she didn't want to go to school. But I'm like, so I'm wearing the mom hat where I'm like, what's wrong? What's wrong? What do I have to do to fix this? And I jump into, my headspace is running around. And finally she told us, the kids are making fun of her. And they're saying that she can't be 5 because she's too small. And her response to that was to throw a fit. And then they called her a baby. And I was sitting there going, what do I even do about this? And I was upset because I see my kid upset about something that she can't do anything about. That's just who she is. And then I spoke with another mother at a very awkward play date. And she mentioned something about all the kids being really, really kind. And I said, well, your daughter is really kind. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, my daughter told me that when other kids weren't being very kind, her friend came over to her and in the ways that only little kids can do said, I know you're 5. And I'm like, none of this actually matters maybe in the grand scheme. But what this kid learned, because she learned this from her parent, was it's okay to say something. And this, again, is not the end of the world, but it was enough that it upset one kid in the space and other kids were hearing it. And this other kid was just kind. And she told her mother, she said, what do I do? And again, I only got this from the parent. I'm never going to get this from a little kid. And she said there was a kid, being picked on in class. And she goes, I didn't like it. And so mother said, what did you do? She goes, I went over to her and I said something nice. And it's as simple as that. That's an example for little kids, but it only gets worse as they get older. Again, kids learn to be unkind. They learn to think negatively about people. They learn to speak rudely about other people. And the vast majority of incidents are never going to be violent. And they're never going to be what we think of as damaging. But having your child know that they do not have to be that, they don't need to be the person who sits there silently. They also do not need to be the kid that stands up in the middle of a room and yells out how bad this is. I think we place a lot of pressure on kids to be the one who fixes it all. And that's a really uncomfortable position to be in. But at the very least, if they can come home to you and be able to tell you that there was something that made them uncomfortable, listen to them. When they tell you something feels off, talk to them about it. Don't brush it off. Don't assume that everything is okay and you can just, again, brush it under the rug because it doesn't seem like a huge deal, as in no one was physically hurt, because that seems to be the barometer most of us sit at. Now, generally, I hate when we say scenarios or role-playing, because in the work that we do much of the time, you very much err on the side of never doing simulations. But in a case like this, you can speak to your kid. And again, without using harmful language, you don't need to repeat things that other kids repeated to be impactful. Just talking to them, you're in a room together, you hear something. What can a child say where they feel safe speaking up? And that may be as simple as teaching them to say, that was really unkind. Like, I don't really want to hear jokes like that. That can stop someone in their tracks. A student that's not meaning to cause harm, that could be enough to actually shut something down, to have a peer tell you that, that's just not that cool. But don't ask your child to do this publicly. Do not ask your child to put themselves in a situation where they may not feel brave or safe. That's asking way too much. And that a change maker can be someone that's just thinking about this, that's able to talk to their teacher, talk to their parent, without the goal of getting someone in trouble, because kids do not want to feel like they're getting someone in trouble. You don't want to have your kid labeled. Let's think back. If you're the kid whose child, committed a bias act, made a racist comment, repeated a slur that they may have learned on TikTok, no one wants their kid to be the kid known as like the racist kid or the mean kid or the one who caused that one incident 5 years ago. No one wants that. And so the first point is, and I can say this from working with the district, no one here is going to be doing that. If your child says or does something wrong, they made a mistake. Similarly, if your child is the one who has, a bias incident or comments made to them, or they don't feel safe, you don't want your child to be singled out. You don't want to have a school assembly and have your child be the one that people know, an incident was directed against, a slur. That makes your kid, like as an adult, I think about that. We received a note at the university that we're not supposed to do something anymore in classes. And my first reaction was, is this because of me? Because I did have an incident with a student where I called them out on something that was well-deserved. But now there's these new rules about things, which are fine. But all I could think of was, oh my God, are people going to hate me? Because they're going to think I'm the one that caused this. That feels political. And this sort of goes back to this idea that, we're in communities. People know each other. People talk. I know that I don't want my kid to be the one singled out for anything. It's this goal when people talk about you want your child to be exceptional. I'm like, I want my kid to be average. I want my kid to blend in to the point where they feel comfortable in different situations without added pressure. And so sometimes, the world that we live in, everything becomes political. You want your kids to play with friends, but if you go to a school, are they going to be that kid that no one now wants to sit with because they're afraid? The comments earlier about everyone's too sensitive these days. Remove this political, and I don't mean like party affiliation, but remove this political idea from your mind that someone else isn't going to like you or like your kid, or you're not going to feel comfortable. My whole sense of this is, do you really want to be around people that don't respect your child and don't respect them being able to speak up? And my child would never be capable of this. We're all capable of this. Children are capable of it, adults are capable of it, and teachers are capable of it. So, commitment of the school, I think, and I hope that this has all been really clear to everybody, is we were called here today not because, there was an incident that we have to respond to, but because there is a real goal on the district's behalf to create expectations, to be consistent, to make sure that as parents, you understand the language a school might be using to describe things that are happening. To think about the difference between intent versus impact. We had a phone call today with a school district. We were actually reaching out to them to respond to feedback we had received from a teacher who came to a conference, where the teacher expressed concerns that some groups of students were treated differently than others. Our response was to call the school, to set up a meeting, just like we would do as parents, to say, hey, you know, we want to talk, and they're telling us how great something is. We're like, that's really nice, and thank you. We appreciate the nice comments, but we really want to talk about this. And they actually tried to brush it off. And they're like, no, we know you would never do something like this. I'm like, well, we would never do this on purpose. Our intent would never be to marginalize any group of students for any reason, to cause them to feel singled out, to cause them to feel discriminated against. But if one student walked away feeling that way, regardless of what our intent was, the impact was negative. And it hurt a student enough that they went back and spoke to a teacher about it. So that was something that was an important lesson for us, that we are all learning. And I think that goes to the staff, you know, professional development training, working with students to help them find their voice, to help them work through these ideas that they may not be sure what to do with, and to address things proactively and restoratively. You notice at no point in here did we bring up the idea of suspension, detention, punishment, but rather for us to think about how we can restore things. We want to know that when your child comes back to school, whether they were, you know, an aggressor, whether they were the student that was targeted by something, whether they were the other kids in the class, that they can all come back and feel secure in that learning environment. As the parent, this does place a lot of pressure on you, because you at home need to be the ones reinforcing the things coming out at school. If a student goes to school all day and they hear about how, you know, we need to treat people with respect, we need to understand, you know, different cultures, different beliefs, you know, different skin colors, different languages, and then they come home and they hear otherwise. Even if it's not intentional, we're all coming from a different place than our kids are, and our lived experiences are different. But what we say at home sticks with them. Speaking honestly about differences, there's nothing I hate more. When we have teachers who came from sort of a different era, many of whom have retired, who said, we're colorblind. We're colorblind, we don't see the difference. I'm like, well, there is a difference. People have different skin tones. Why are you worrying about people knowing that you see that? We can see. We can hear differences. Acknowledge that. Talk to your kids about it. Celebrate it. Turn it from something that they may see as an other, that they don't really feel like they have anything to do with, to something to learn more about. Please monitor, and I'm sure you all do this, but it goes without saying, monitor their online behavior and their social media presence. Because I think the stats were something like, and this was a few years ago, it takes like 7 minutes, something like that, for your kid to encounter hate speech in some form on social media. 7 minutes. The algorithms will find them. They find me. And I laugh sometimes that I probably have like sort of the most basic profiles, and I'm like, how is this getting to me? All I talk about is like my dogs, my kids, and promoting and sharing work that we do. And it comes to me, so it is getting to your kids. And to keep those communication lines open. You know, we know they're still going to see things. No matter how hard you try, they're going to see it. You take away their phone, they're going to see their friend's phone. They're going to see and hear things. The more that they know that you are open and that you are not going to judge them or punish them for seeing something, even if they weren't supposed to. They come to you and they say, I saw this thing on TikTok. Can we talk about it? And you're like, but wait, you weren't supposed to be on TikTok. Well, but they were. Get over it. Focus on what actually matters, which is keeping them safe. And so.
Okay. You were on a roll.
I was on a roll.
Yes. And so before we close, I'm going to do what every teacher says not to do and go back a couple slides because I want to, truly keep on the theme that we are addressing terminology, right? And not assuming that people know what we're talking about. And so in this slide, I have bolded, teach your child what it means to be a change maker. What is a change maker? Anyone? What's a change maker? And this slide used to look a little different, and we've changed it in recent years. Didn't mean to use change again, but we've changed it in recent years because it used to say, tell them what it means to be an upstander. Has anyone heard that word before? Yes, an upstander. What's an upstander? Yes, great. Someone that's not afraid to speak up or act upon something when it's wrong. Yeah, that's a pretty good definition of upstander, right? But upstander to me and to some others indicates a specific moment, right? If you stand up to one act, yes, you've been an upstander, and yes, that's amazing. Not putting that down or discrediting it at all. But that's one moment, right? And we've talked about this whole time, stereotypes, forms of biases, how they've existed for hundreds of years. And so one act, while it's important, is not enough. We want to have and create change makers because that is what's going to stop these stereotypes, these harmful biased acts by making change. And it's through that one action, right, of being an upstander, but multiple times, and so that it becomes natural, not only for that one person, but for all of us. And so I just wanted to come back quickly before we close to really address that. I'm hopeful that we are empowering all of our children, myself included, to be change makers. Okay. And so in closing, as we've said, bias is learned, but so is empathy. We can achieve growth, ourselves included, at any stage, and we need to build partnerships between ourselves as parents, between our children, and between our schools. And every single student is worthy of dignity, respect, safety, belonging, and a brave space. And so thank you for being here tonight, for being part of this anti-bias work, and for empowering your students. And virtual parents, we thank you as well. To the administrators for having us, please know that this has been such an honor. We really appreciate the opportunity to educate yourselves and your community. Thank you for including us, and we hope to see you all very soon. Thank you. Any questions?
We know it's after 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Believe us, we know Sarah has a 2-hour drive. So
I do, yes. Oh, I will share this presentation. I pulled the plug too soon because it does have our contact information. So if there's anything else you want to learn, if you want to learn more about the work that we do, if you want to come to any of our programs, maybe you want your students to attend one of the conferences that we have, please send us an email. I'll share this. You'll have access to it. Or if you just want to reference it and have this conversation with your child, that would be awesome. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, thank you.